Welcome to Freedom Unshackled, the podcast. My name is Ronnie, and today we're going to do a deep dive into a topic that affects thousands of lives in New York State and beyond. The culture of violence within our correctional system. This is a conversation that must be had. It is a conversation that many are too afraid to speak about, but I am not. And let me tell you, I am not here to sugarcoat it. We're going to get uncomfortable. We're going to get informed. But most importantly, we're going to get action. We're going to take action. Let me start with a question. Let me see. Why is it that when someone is sentenced to serve time in prison, they are also being sentenced to beatings, rapes, and far too often deaths? This is the reality for far too many incarcerated men and women. The heightened awareness to this comes after the tragic, brutal, vicious murder of Robert Brooks at the hands of correctional officers at Marcy Correctional Facility. But this conversation, to be very clear, is long overdue, and I'm going to keep having it until there is a reimagining of the Department of Corrections and Community Supervisions. Because let's be clear, the parole officers are just as bad and vicious and evil and violent as the correctional officers. Too many of us know this level of violence because we've lived it. As formerly incarcerated people, we've witnessed the violence firsthand. You go in these correctional facilities, whether it's a city or county jail or prison, thinking your struggles will be with other incarcerated individuals. But no, that's not the case. It's a harsh reality check when you realize that the majority of the violence, the harm, comes from those entrusted with holding care, custody, and control. The correctional officers, the medical staff, the civilian employees, and the parole officers. This isn't some isolated misconduct, what happened to Robert Brooks. No, this is a culture that thrives on secrecy and unchecked power and a complete lack of accountability. This is a culture that is a virus, and that virus infects all of us. This culture, this virus, doesn't just harm the incarcerated, it damages families, it rips apart communities, and it corrupts the very idea of what justice should look like in our society. We cannot remain silent. It is time for us to break that silence. It is time to demand transparency, to demand oversight, and to build systems that treat every individual with dignity and respect, no matter their past. Let me say this loud and clear. Formerly incarcerated men and women cannot sit back, now that we are free, and act like we don't know what we left, what was happening inside. We know what they are doing to our people behind those walls. We know that people who are in prison in New York State correctional facilities are being raped, murdered, and killed. These are patterns of abuse that we cannot ignore. I am not just a survivor of that system, but as someone determined to change it. Together, we can expose these injustices and build a future where rehabilitation, fairness, and humanity replace abuse, neglect, and corruption. And let me tell you the hard truth. From downstate New York, it gets worse the further you go into western and upstate New York, where these small cities depend on their very livelihoods on those correctional facilities. In those facilities, nepotism reigns supreme, creating an environment where misconduct is not just protected, it is nurtured. People who want to maybe tell what's happening in there are silenced. They're silenced by threats of not making their parole board. They're silenced the threats of being put in the solitary housing units. They are silenced with violence. And the New York State Department of Correction and Community Supervisions allowed this culture to thrive unchecked. From the commissioners on down, they know what's happening in those facilities. The commissioners knows, the deputy securities knows, the superintendents knows, they all know. Just like we all know. And it has to stop. The Attorney General's office, Tish James, she needs to set up unannounced visits to correctional facilities because they aren't just necessary, they are long overdue. We need transparency to expose realities behind these walls and to hold bad actors accountable. Lawmakers, let me be clear. Nepotism in corrections is more than a problem. It is a pipeline to abuse. We need policies that disrupt these toxic systems and demand a reimagining of the Department of Corrections and Community Supervisions, a complete overhaul, because they are passing that violence down generation to generations in those correctional facilities. Children are learning from their mothers and fathers how to be violent against those incarcerated in those walls. Now, recently I read that Governor Kathy Hochul announced she plans to embed in staff from the Department of Corrections and Community Supervision within the Office of Special Investigators, OSI. When I first looked at it, it seemed like a step in the right direction. But after I gave it some thought, I realized it's a problem. This isn't progress. It's a system investigating itself under a new name. So let's call it what it is. The fox cannot guard the hen house. We cannot trust those complicit in the system to fix it. We need independent oversight, period. The justice system is already strained. Too many already doubt its fairness, its trustworthiness, its transparency. For those impacted by the decisions of docs, for the families, the advocates, the incarcerated, they deserve more than empty promises. They deserve justice. They deserve accountability. And when harm happens, whether it's abuse, negligence, or worse, those harmed deserve to have their voices heard by an independent body, not just by those who may be more concerned about protecting each other than seeking the truth. This is why we must stand together. We cannot do this alone. We need to demand better. We need independent oversight, a body that is impartial, transparent, and committed to delivering justice. A body that will not stand idly by while corruption flourishes. And this isn't just about policy. This is a human issue. Justice begins when we hold systems accountable. We have the power to raise our voices, to demand better, and to make sure this never happens again. It needs to end. So I urge you, as I urge myself, raise your voice, write to your representatives, show up, get involved, attend rallies like the parole justice event that's happening on January 28th. Make it clear, accountability is non-negotiable. True justice is built on fairness, transparency, and compassion. And until our systems reflect those values, none of us can truly feel safe. This is where you and I come in. We can't do this without collective action. I'm asking everyone to stand with us, faith communities, other organizations, collectives, to put pressure on those in power to hold them, the elected officials, accountable. Because this is now falling in their laps too. Robert Brooks' death is now on each and every elected official in New York State, along with every other beating and rape and death that happens in New York State correctional facilities. The legislators are now accountable also. Contact your legislators, demand oversight and reform, reach out to Attorney General's office, urge them to prioritize unannounced visits to these facilities, share stories, raise awareness, and refuse to let the abuse stay hidden. Because justice doesn't just end with a sentencing. It includes safety, dignity, and the right to live, even behind those bars. They have a right to live safely. They have a right to not fear the very people that are supposed to be there for those 3 C's: care, custody, and control. Because here's the truth. There is no care. We are in their custody, and they are completely out of control. And you know what? I heard a legislator, when they was rallying about not closing, I think it was Greenhaven Correctional Facility, a legislator called the incarcerated men and women animals. Those are animals. Well, you know who were the animals? The animals were on camera beating to death Robert Brooks. The animals are those who viciously raped the women in Albion and Bedford Correctional Facility and all the city and county jails. The animals are when they come 15 deep to stomp on one small woman. Those are the animals. And let me tell you something. I've mentioned a few times the oversight bill that has been introduced by Senator Salazar. Senator Salazar's bill is a step in the right direction. It is a bill that refuses to let the Department of Corrections and Community Supervision investigate itself when it comes to cases of sexual harassment and assault. We all know how that turns out. Nothing but cover-ups. This bill places the power in the hands of the Inspector General's office where it belongs. They answer to the people, not to the very department that has failed time and time again. But this bill shouldn't stand alone. It needs to be accompanied by other bills that stop docs from investigating themselves across the board. We need a full-scale overhaul of how these investigations are handled. We need accountability, and we need it now. This bill has passed the Senate twice, and I'm still referring to the bill that Senator Salazar put in place. But now it's time for Speaker Carl Hastings to bring it to the floor in the Assembly. This isn't something we can afford to wait on. The time for talk is over. We need action, and we need it now. It's time to hold the system accountable and to ensure that no one, no matter their position, commissioner on down, is above the law. Let's make our voices heard and demand justice for those who have been ignored for far too long. Robert Brooks' family knows they brutally murdered him. There are way too many other families out there with death certificates from these facilities, with way too many questions on what happened to their sons, their daughters, their mothers, fathers, sisters, brothers, grandmothers, or grandfathers. They need answers. They need to know what happened. They didn't have accidental body cams left on. Too many deaths have been covered up. I want to thank you for joining me today on this deep dive into the harsh realities of our correctional system. Together we have the power to demand change, to reimagine a system that upholds humanity for everyone. I want to encourage everyone to join us in Albany on January 28th for the first Parole Justice Advocacy Day of this session. For more details, please refer to the Releasing Aging People in Prison website. Click on events and register for that day, January 28th. Free transportation is available from various locations throughout the state of New York. Hope to see you then. Until we meet again, keep raising your voice, keep standing your ground, and never let the fire for justice die. The fight is far from over, and together we will win. And to take a thought from the late, great Honorable John Lewis, we will continue to get in good trouble. Thank you for joining me.